Heights HSM. What's happening? It's Pastor Tim, and this week I have a guest speaker for you. I cannot wait for you to watch and hear about how Jesus challenged people to do something radical. It was crazy. Some people think Jesus was just this pacifist. Everything's about love, but he said some things to challenge the heart of people. And that's what we're going to hear about today. And then stay tuned, because after the message, I have some exciting news that I can't wait to pass on to you.
Hi, everybody. My name's Doug, and I want to start by asking you a question. What's something in your life that causes you to experience a head snapper? You know what a head snapper is? It's one of those things where you're like, I didn't see that coming. It's something that's wild, or it's stunning, or it's just so different that it causes you to like, what? I asked my friend Jimmy Fallon, some of you may recognize him, to illustrate what head snapping looks like. Watch. That's perfect. That's a head snapper. For me, a lot of times it's when I watch sports. I'm a basketball fan, and the things that they can do in the air, the 360s and the slam. I mean, sometimes I pull a muscle just watching them. I mean, they are total head snappers to me. Most of the time I watch NBA basketball, this is what I look like. The reason I want you to be thinking about a head snapper for you is because I want to introduce you to something head snapping that Jesus said. He taught in the Sermon on the Mount, and if you don't know this, the Sermon on the Mount is from Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And if you're kind of new to the whole faith, you're not a Bible reader, you could really spend the rest of your life reading the Sermon on the Mount. And if you are a person of faith and you do read the Bible, you could spend the rest of your life just trying to live out the principles in the Sermon on the Mount. And one of the things that Jesus said was a total head snapper. He said this. He said, "You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Now, he was talking to a group of people that would have known all about the law, kind of the Old Testament. Many of them would have had it memorized. And so, when he says, you've heard it said before, hate your enemies, they would have like, yeah, we grew up with that. But he says something so different. And actually, I think this is where the phrase, oh, Jesus must have come from, because when he says, I say, love your enemies. I mean, you can just almost imagine people going, oh, Jesus, really love my enemies? I'd rather be gluten-free. Are you kidding me? Love your enemies. Oh, Jesus, I'd rather, vacation in North Korea. I mean, it was so radical. And so one of the things that I think about with, when I'm talking to people who are kind of outside the faith, they're investigating Jesus, they're curious, they're kind of on the outside looking in, is I say, you don't realize how radical Jesus was and his teachings were. And I think sometimes those of us who are people of faith or Christians, I don't think we realize how radical it is to follow the person and the teachings of Jesus. And so because we don't think Jesus is radical or calling us to a radical lifestyle, we kind of dumb Jesus down, or we make him a soft, cuddly type toy or a jacket that we put on when we want to feel warm and it's convenient for us. But Jesus is calling us to something so radical. Actually, a few verses later in the same chapter, Matthew chapter 5, he says this, "If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much." So, basically a paraphrase is like, hey, anybody can love those who love them. I mean, even the corrupt, evil pagans do that. So Jesus is calling you and I to a higher type of love, a deeper type of love. Now, why? Why should we love our enemies? Because if you imagine your heart like a sponge, okay, and you were to just put that anger, that tension, that or got an enemy, and you put it around that sponge, you can't. And let's say God's love is water, and you were to dip that sponge in water. If there's a fist around your heart, you're not able to, give that love to other people, to friendships, to your family, to those who are, in the world. It's all quenched up, and you can't compartmentalize your heart, meaning you can't love fully when you're hating in your heart. And so Jesus is saying, hey, I want you to love your enemy. So here's the question. Who's your enemy? For some of you, that enemy will come right away. Like, you know that person, they bullied you, or, they kicked your cat over the fence, or they've done something to hurt you, and you know who they are right away. And for some of you, you may not have a person's name that is quenching love, but you've created what I would call emotional enemies. That we create rivals in our heart all the time, like people have things that we don't have. So, for example, if I go to the gym and let's say I see an old guy like me and he's got a six-pack abs, and I feel something like, man, I wish I had six-pack abs, but I don't. So no big deal. Grab a donut, move on, okay? If I want a six-pack, I'm old enough to go buy one at the store. But I don't have those abs. But it wasn't enough to really make him a rival. Let's say I go to the gym the next day, and he has his brand new Porsche, and it's parked in 3 parking spots. And I'm driving an old Suburban, and I can't find a parking spot, so now I've got to squeeze my Suburban in between trash trucks and shopping carts. And I can't even open the door, so I have to dismount out the back because my abs aren't strong enough to dismount through the moonroof. And then I go inside the gym, and I ask who it is, and I see the guy, and I go, oh, yeah, of course he drives a Porsche. And I make him an emotional enemy because he's tasted some success that I don't have. And see, if I'm honest with you, I'm quick to do that. I can create emotional enemies all the time. So it might not just be a person or somebody that that person's name. You would go around through life creating these emotional enemies. And what happens is, the reason Jesus wants us to love our enemies is because when we don't love our enemies, that enemy has a grip on our heart. And here's what it does. It quenches our joy. It keeps us from the happiness that you and I want in life. It keeps us from loving to the fullest. And so Jesus calls us to do something radical. He calls us to do something head-snapping. And I just want to let you know, this is not easy. Like loving your enemy and forgiving people, this is not natural. So, for example, if you were to hurt me, what's natural is for me to want to hurt you back. If you were to hurt me, what's natural is, I want to see you experience some pain. So when you hurt me, I don't run to the kitchen and bake a little reconciliation cake and say, hey, let's share a piece together. No, when you hurt me, I want a meteor to strike you. I want to laugh at your pain. I want to burn down your... No, that's a little violent. But here's my point, is I want you to hurt in some way since you hurt me. This isn't natural, but here's what you need to hear. Forgiveness is not natural, but it is spiritual. As a matter of fact, do you know that you're never more like Jesus than when you forgive? Jesus isn't asking us to do something he hasn't done himself. Like when Jesus was hanging on the cross, he's been brutally beaten. People have hated him. They've screamed at him. They've accused him. He's hanging on the cross. And some of the last words of Jesus are this: forgive them, for they know not what they do. So, if you're harboring some enemies, whether they're emotional enemies or real enemies, can I just say that you're not living the life that God wants you to live because your heart is being quenched. Your heart is being tightened, and he has so much more for you. And when you love your enemies, here's what you're doing. You're doing something head-snapping. You're doing something so unusual, but that's the life that God calls us to. So I encourage you, go give some head-snapping forgiveness.
Man, hopefully you were challenged by something that Doug said today, and that this week would bring some head-snapping opportunities to show forgiveness and love. So, what's the big announcement, you say? Well, it's this. Next Tuesday night, 7 p.m., we're going to come at you with a virtual game night with worship. It's going to be great. Our worship team is putting together some music for us so that we'll be able to do that together, and the games are going to be awesome. So you're going to want to tune in on a Zoom meeting to gather together at 7 p.m. Now, here's some of the prizes. Like, think about, if you win one of these games, we're going to DoorDash some food to you. You may get HSM staff bringing you frozen yogurt, or you may just get a gift pack that just randomly shows up on your doorstep. It's going to be awesome. You're not going to want to miss it. Gather your friends and stay tuned, because we will be giving you the Zoom link later this week. We'll see you next Tuesday at HSM Virtual Group Time. Take care.